Patrick Finaro here, co-founder at Visa Franchise. Today, excited to have on Moses Saitiel, a corporate and franchise attorney, also based here in South Florida in Coral Gables, not so far from our office. Moses, thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So I know you handle all different types of corporate law, whether it's on the litigation side, also representing franchisees, franchisors. In today's conversation, I'd like to focus a bit more on your practice related to helping franchisees throughout, especially the initial phase of signing that franchise disclosure document, signing the franchise agreement, as well as maybe, ongoing conflicts that they might have that you can help advise on. First, how did you transition from a commercial litigator to also helping franchisees?
I started my career in commercial litigation, mostly on a securities litigation firm. Through the years there was one of the partners also did a little bit of transactional practice. So I started working with him a little bit in that. But my avenue to franchise really started in litigating franchise disputes. Eventually got to learn a lot about the different regulations, whether it's Florida or federal, that apply to franchises, and started slowly helping some franchisors and franchisees on the transactional side to eventually, when I did start my practice, and we have a transactional division and a litigation division, one of the areas that we focus on transactional is franchise law, and we represent both franchisors. We help register, create, issue new franchises, and certainly can help franchisees when they're coming into the relationship to advise them on that.
And then on the franchisee side, what are some items that you look out so they can basically get to an agreement to avoid, future conflict with franchisors down the line?
The first thing is really not a legal component. It's more of a mind check of the franchisee of sort of managing expectations, what relationship you're getting into, and what does it really mean, right? I think after we get past that initial sort of mind check and understanding what we're getting into is, okay, what are the franchise laws that really apply in general to any franchise agreement or franchise transaction? So sort of give them some guidance without losing them so much in the legalese, but giving them some guidance of what are do's and don'ts from a franchisor standpoint and from a franchisee standpoint, right? And I think the third thing is always making sure they understand their contract. I think franchisees have very little ability to negotiate a lot of the franchise terms, particularly on a more established franchise. So it's more important for me that they're conscious on what are the legal responsibilities and what are their rights also getting into that franchise, and sort of give them that roadmap.
And I know you've worked with many different immigration attorneys, and including Fernando Sokol, who introduced us.
Yeah.
What are some of the items that you have to be mindful of and kind of balance with that immigration attorney for someone that's investing in a franchise to obtain the E-2 visa?
Yeah, I would say that the responsibility is even larger, right? Because one of the things that we do here in our firm is not just help people get into franchises, but we also work with immigration attorneys. Somebody is trying to buy a business, maybe somebody trying to buy a franchise sometimes, right? And
like a franchise resale, for
right,
example, or an
franchise
existing
resale.
business.
And part of the problem I always hear is, well, we could be managing an acquisition that's worth $34 million or a purchase of a franchise maybe for $150,000. Which one is more important because of the dollar value? What I tell my team is, when we're working with immigration clients, this is really the vehicle for their livelihood here in the United States. So it actually, the stakes are higher because we understand that the consequence could be even worse than just losing out on investment. Could potentially mean your livelihood here in the U.S. So one of the first things we always do is check with the immigration attorney, make sure that they've already approved or given the client some guidelines on the type of business they're buying, and what's the viability of being able to obtain the visa with that kind of business. I know your team and Visa Franchise obviously vets that a lot, so they already kind of come in through some sort of screening and looking for franchises that work for that, right? That would be the first thing that I would work with a franchise attorney, make sure that the client understands that, and then making sure that we're sort of guiding and being careful with the client coming in and buying into a franchise to ensure that they're successful, or at least that they're buying into an opportunity that will let them be successful if they and operate the business the right way, right? But that they're careful because they could otherwise end up in legal disputes and issues that can quickly minimize their success here in the U.S. or their stay. I mean, sometimes you've seen clients that haven't been successful and have to leave everything and go back, right? Which is not what they're trying to do.
Moses, are there more legal risk and time for someone that wants to buy an existing franchise, like a franchise resale, or start fresh with opening up a new location?
Yeah, look, when we're talking about legal risk, when you're buying a business that's already operating, a good legal due diligence is always important, and even a financial due diligence, right? Obviously, you have the accountants doing that to make sure that the numbers truly reflect what they're showing you on paper. And on the legal side, look, we want to investigate what are the debts that may exist, what are the agreements that may bind them to certain things, and how easy it is to transfer those contracts, right? So there's obviously a risk because you have now a history of operation, and that could result into unknown liabilities that haven't surfaced, right? But a good due diligence would minimize a lot of that risk. On the flip side, you don't have that risk when you're starting a new franchise. It's like starting any new business, but you still got to build up the business, right? So there's maybe more of an operational risk in putting your effort to make sure that that franchise is successful and build up the business from the ground up. So it's just a bit of a risk tolerance analysis that we got to go through with the client and see where they prefer how they prefer to enter the market.
I think it makes a lot of sense. So buying an existing franchise that has, earnings of 100K, probably less immigration risk because it's already making money. You don't have to sell the opportunity to the consulate or the USCIS officer. But there's more legal risk that, the seller could be doing some funky things and, and also accounting risk where if you start with a clean slate, it's a clean slate and you know exactly what you're getting into for that business entity.
And I hate to put it into money perspectives because obviously money a lot of times sort of drives decisions, right? But it
Sure.
also depends on what's the financial tolerance or sustainability of that investor because obviously a business that's already operating, you're getting income maybe from day one, although you're investing in it, and another one you have to sort of wait for it to mature. So depending on how much cash they have to invest is obviously going to be a factor.
Yeah, we see that especially with our E-2 visa clients that are willing to, roll up the sleeves and work really hard in the business.
Right.
100K, 150K usually does the trick,
Yeah.
including the working capital to break even. But I think it's tough. I don't know your experience buying an existing business, 100K, 150. It seems like there's just not so much in that price range.
Pre-pandemic they were there, right, and they were going fast. Right now anything around that range there's probably an issue, right? You're not really investing into a business that's giving you much of a return.
So, given your experience advising both franchisors and franchisees, what are some ways that both parties can, avoid conflict and avoid it going to, demand letters, mediation, and then what's the other step, arbitration, etc.
There's data on this, right? The two most common franchise disputes that lead to litigation is franchisee not paying their franchise dues or
Royalty.
holding back
Yeah.
because they're upset at franchisor for not doing something, and whether franchisor is sort of following through with their promises, right? And a lot of times it comes down to is the franchisor giving the support that they generally promise, right? Because if you're a franchisee, you're buying into a model that's somewhat established. You have systems and procedures that are in place, and that supposedly, right, cuts the learning curve and also if you're thinking about an investor that's coming from a different jurisdiction, even the learning curve of entering a new market, right? So a lot of times that's the motivation of buying into a franchise, but then the franchisor doesn't really deliver on the support or on the training or on the oversight that they a lot of times say. So how do we avoid the conflict between the two? Franchisor, do what you're promising, and franchisee, make sure you're staying up with your obligations and paying, right? I think those are the two keys.
And obviously, things change in time. And like for Visa franchise, we've had franchise wars where the franchise brand, is approved for a while, generally anywhere from like 50 to 60 brands, but a lot of them fall out. And that might be over a 6 month, 3 year, 10 year period. And so, brands evolve like anything in life. But I find it's really helpful for people investigating a franchise to, validate with people that are already operating the business and seeing how happy they are with that franchisor or franchisee relationship.
Absolutely. I think that one of the keys for a franchisee, particularly, do your due diligence. Ask around,
Yeah.
ask for references, see how well the franchisor supports the franchisee, see how well they're doing, not just financially, but in the public eye. Because a franchise is like any business. You have good franchises and bad franchises. And a lot of times they just buy into a franchise thinking that no matter what, all the franchises are the same, they operate the same. But no, you may have a franchise that's just not a good business model or not run properly, and that affects the investment. And once you're locked into a franchise agreement, it makes it very difficult to get out, right? Without litigation in certain degrees, and that could also be costly.
And I've seen it with our clients and just being in the franchising space. It's really who's the owner at that current point.
Right.
Where you could have bought a franchise and then the ownership group of the franchisors change. It's been sold to a private equity group.
Right.
And then it's up to their decision how they handle, if you want to get out of the contract. Obviously, hopefully you're earning 50, 100, 200K plus and you sell at a nice multiple EBITDA. But if you're in a tough situation and that for whatever reason the business didn't work out, there's some franchisors that will just, cut it. Hey, you tried, it's been 2 years, it's not working out. The territory or whatever the location, if it was a restaurant, it didn't hit. And for restaurants especially, like,
right.
1 in 5 is probably going to fail for even, some of the best systems over a few year period. And they just kind of amicably split. But then I've heard of other ones, like I'm thinking of an automotive brand where they forced to, pay the royalties for the minimum royalty for the full tenor of the franchise agreement.
That's another good point there to watch out for, right? Because some franchises, depending on the type of business, of course, will require a certain volume of sales, right? And some won't. Some is just a straight percentage of whatever you sell. Obviously, they want you to be successful. That's where they make their money. But that's something for the franchisees to look out for, because you may go into a very sales-oriented franchise and also are not hitting quota. You may think you're doing great, but you may not be hitting quota. And a lot of times these franchisors have rights to take over the business and the franchise unit that you're operating. So that's one thing to look out for when you're looking into the agreements.
Yeah, I mean, they have step-in rights for a lot of different brands if you're not performing. And I would say that's one for our clients over the years. That's been one term that franchisors have been open to negotiate, like when the minimum payments or minimum royalty kicks in. If it's after 3 or 6 months, because they're moving from a different country, maybe the ramp up period will be a little slower. Kicking that out to 9 months.
Right.
I think it's one of the areas it doesn't hurt to ask. Yeah. It doesn't mean all franchise brands will accept it, but some of the smaller ones, especially owner, like where the founder owner is still involved, they might be amenable to that. What are some things that we haven't gone through so far that prospective franchisees should be mindful of as they enter into this commercial relationship?
I think kind of piggybacking one of my previous answers is the first thing is understand what you're getting into, right? And I think the first thing we'll do for franchisees is we do a bit of a brief, right, through the franchise disclosure document, the franchise agreement. And we prepare what's called like a franchisee summary, okay? And what we're highlighting there are general I'm going to call them more categories that we know are important, that are traditionally in almost every franchise agreement or franchise disclosure document. We're highlighting those things for the franchisee to understand what are their rights and obligations, right? Because a lot of times they only focus on how much am I paying in royalty, how much am I paying, can they take royalties for marketing, right? But a lot of times they're not taking into consideration certain obligations that the franchisor puts there to be able to maintain or control their, do more quality control of their brand, right? And there's certain things that as a franchisee, you're going to have to maybe update or spend certain amount on certain things that you're going to have to change as the business progresses, right? And those things are important because a lot of times I see franchisees that don't bother reviewing that. They sort of take well, I got to sign this no matter what, kind of like your mortgage at the house, right? You got to sign whatever they put in front of you. But then, 3 years later, the franchisor is telling you, hey, it's your time to do this thing that we had on the agreement, and they don't realize that, right? So I think the first thing is sort of putting a little summary of those important terms, so you have at least, if nothing else, at least a guide, right, of what are those things and what do they mean for me. The other thing is we're looking for inconsistencies. A lot of times, franchisors update their FDDs and their franchise agreements almost every year, and sometimes you start catching inconsistencies, right? And which one governs, and then the franchisee, the dispute is going to be who understood what at the time of contracting. So I want to avoid those things from the get-go and really get to everybody having the same understanding, So we'll highlight those things for them when they're initially coming in. The third thing I would say is, what is the franchisee's goal, really, from a business perspective, and does this franchise help them achieve that? And if not, this is really more of a business discussion. But if not, let's have that conversation, because once you sign that franchise agreement, again, it is really hard to get out of those agreements, and they usually have terms of minimum 5 to 10 years, right? So that's important to know.
Yeah, it's well said. And, there are over 7,000 franchise and licensed brands. And I think only 10% of those like really truly make financial sense, where it's better to go, the franchise or licensed business path rather than just do your own independent business. And there are options, and at no time, it's better to pull the escape cord if you're having doubts earlier
Right.
rather than if you enter into that 5 to 10 year relationship. And that's why Visa Franchise, we mandate in our agreement that they have corporate franchise attorney counsel. So you as an investor really know what you're getting into. And I would see it as more of like an insurance policy, where you got to really understand what's going on and what could happen. And you get cold feet based on that legal brief, then hey, there's other opportunities in the franchise space, or at Visa Franchise, we can advise you on your own independent startup.
Right.
But it's much less costly than if you move forward and then weren't able to sell the business because it wasn't profitable in some set period of time.
And I know nobody likes to pay for legal fees, right, up front, but it's a lot cheaper to pay for legal fees and understand, get a good review of what you're getting into than later having to litigate, right? So I obviously, I mean, I'm biased in this case, but I obviously recommend it.
And then Moses, imagine someone's having issues with the franchisor, the business isn't working out, or they're not able to sell to whoever they want. When does it make sense to involve you? And then when does it make sense for you to be the point of contact with the franchisor? Because from what I've seen, once the lawyer's in contact with the franchisor, you're not opening any more locations, and the relationship's going to be kind of pretty soured if there's now an attorney between the franchisor and
Right.
franchisee.
I would say involve us. I would say almost from the beginning, right? I understand that a franchisee that just opened, other than that initial review and maybe counsel on understanding what they're getting into, there's what I call startup legal costs. Really should be minimal as you go. But I would say one of the things we offer is, let's do at a minimum a yearly check-in, right? Understand, how's the business doing? What are the things you're planning on doing, right? Because one of the things that we often find is clients have great ideas to expand their business. They're entrepreneurial. They're looking for ways to better their business every single day, right? And then a year later, they're thinking, well, my business has grown, so now I want to do this. Okay, but can we actually do that according to the franchise agreement, right? I would say that yearly checkup to sort of refresh what's going on with the business. Are we still on track with the franchise agreement? Has something changed with the franchisor? Like you said, maybe something negative, right? And now we have
Change
to
of
get involved
control, ownership
directly.
on the franchisor level.
Right. Maybe now we have to get direct and talk to the franchisor and say, hey, you guys are not really doing what you promised, right? I would say involved always. And again, we're talking about minimal yearly cost. When do we get involved with the franchisor? I think we generally will try to counsel the client as much as we can, resolving disputes, as we would call it, amicably, or at least having conversations. If it gets to the point of everybody's kind of, standing on their own corner and nobody's sort of giving in a little bit and understanding this is a business relationship, then unfortunately sometimes it takes us to come in and assist the client on whether the franchise is not complying or complying, right?
So I imagine in some ways you act as a trusted advisor, where you're not inserted into the relationship between the franchisor and franchisee, but you're advising the franchisee client,
Yeah.
How to navigate these issues, whether it's in expansion and getting more capital, and if you need approval, or some problems they might have in the relationship.
Yeah, a lot of times, successful franchises, in our view, a lot of times we never talk to the franchisor. We're only counseling the client. We're only talking to the franchisor on two occasions, where they're selling the franchise or there's a problem, and now we're trying to resolve the problem.
What are some things you advise your franchisor clients on? Because at the end of the day, they are basically getting married to someone they might have just known for 2 months.
Yeah.
I think especially on just like the risk of having someone that could be litigious or just a bad cultural fit for the franchise system.
A lot of franchisors, larger franchisors that have become more corporate, are not having interviews with franchisees early on. Have an interview, understand who you're going to business with as much as you can. Particularly somebody that doesn't have a track record here in the US. Well, you want to understand what they did in the background because they may be coming from a completely different industry. Or how are they going to fit in this industry? The other thing for franchisors is you can control what you can control, and I think on franchisors is if you're going to make certain promises, and particularly in the FDDs, that's the number one place where franchisors get in trouble. Make sure you're following up on those promises, right? Have the team behind you to give that support. And I see that a lot, unfortunately, with newer franchises. I think they think it's a great idea, and you have your first franchise and your second franchise unit, and you can sort of keep the relationship a little bit more informal. But also, then you really grew, and now you need a franchise team to operate your franchise, and you're not giving that support or don't have the bandwidth to give that support to franchisees. That's where franchisors start to get in trouble. So I would say, make sure if you're really trying to get into the business of being a franchisor, be a franchisor, right? Not just try to have a side business.
I like that. I mean, they should be well capitalized, and that could be through getting an injection of capital from like a private equity fund, family office, or
Perhaps, yeah.
strategic company, or it could be they have a bunch of corporate locations and they're netting $1 million a year, and they're just putting that right into the franchise
Yeah.
entity until it hits royalty sufficiency,
Right.
which could be 20 to 50 units
Yeah.
until the franchise business actually really makes financial sense.
Yes.
And they're not blowing through cash. And we see it a lot with some of the most successful franchises, I should say, where it's like for every corporate employee, like at the franchise brand level, there's 10 franchisees or there's 7 franchisees. If it's like 1 to 50, that's like a really bad ratio. There should be certain corporate employees providing support as the franchise system really grows. Moses, any concluding thoughts?
First of all, thank you, right, for inviting me to talk to you in the interview. I think the conversation has been very fluid and a good one. I would just like to highlight that whether it's an ongoing franchise that we can sort of do corporate work for, we have the experience to work with them. Whether it's a franchisor that's thinking of starting a franchise and they're just having questions about how does the business really work, how to set it up and whatnot. And franchisees. My only concluding thought definitely is get the legal assessment or get the legal counseling when you're entering the relationship, and do as much background work as you can. Be picky with the franchise you're picking because they don't all come in the same colors as we would say. They're different, and there are ones that are good, there are ones that are bad, and I think trying to get as much information will definitely yield a lot of the chances for success.
Moses, if someone needs initial support or ongoing support from you and your colleagues, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Absolutely. So, I mean, we obviously have our webpage, and anybody can go and from there you can contact us. Phone number. We even have a WhatsApp line because we work a lot with the international markets, or our same phone. You can call us through WhatsApp. Email obviously is a good way, and then social media. Right, you can reach out, and we'll certainly bring you into the team and have somebody help you out. Right.
Perfect. We'll be sure to include all those links in the description, and just wanted to thank you again for sharing your knowledge with our audience.
Thank you, Patrick.